allow me to join my guests for tonight. Amos Wekesa, sitting right next to me, the founder, Great Lakes Safaris and Uganda Lodges Limited. Thank you for staying behind, Amos.
Thank you.
Oh, and then we have Simon Nampindo, who is the Country Director, Wildlife Conservation Society. Thank you very much, Simon.
Thank you for having me.
All right, and finally we have Barbara Duso, who is the Board Chair of Association of Uganda Tour Operators, Auto.
Thank you for having me.
All right, well, before we begin our conversation on what opportunities are there, how are we actually doing with this sector?
You want to go ahead?
In the business.
Yeah, you're in the business. You tell us.
I think what I can say is that Uganda's future is promising.
Okay.
In as far as tourism is concerned. Of course, it's, we also want, of course, to be thankful to what NTV has done, particularly in trying to make sure that they create awareness about tourism as a subject. Remember when you had Sights and Sounds, that program alone just changed the way an average Ugandan thinks about tourism. I've personally participated in the advocacy of tourism since 2007, and it was out of an Ananga discussion out of Nairobi, based on our tourism as well. So I've personally seen that it's much easier for me, or I'm sure my colleague as well will tell you that, to be able to express anything about tourism much easier because the audience that I'll be speaking to have an idea about tourism. But that said, we're still at the bottom line as a country. And just to give you an idea, we've got 10 national parks and 12 game reserves. In all our 10 national parks and 12 game reserves combined, 10 national parks and 12 game reserves, we've got less than 120,000 foreign tourists that go into them every year. In fact, a lot of it, we're not just very good at collecting our data, but if you go down to proper data, you'll find that we're all fighting to take around about 80,000 tourists. Now, that 80,000 tourists is one-to-one company in Kenya handles. In a year. In Kenya's 29 national parks and 12 game reserves, they handle 2.4 million people inside, Kenyans plus foreigners going to their national parks. That's the difference. We don't even make 10% of what actually goes into Kenya national parks in terms of foreigners. Now, that said, it is now time for us. No one is going to change the situation. I always tell everybody that until Ugandans buy into Uganda, because we all sit there and think somebody from heaven is going to come and invest in this country. And I'm one of the guys who doesn't think that somebody's going to come from heaven and invest in Uganda. And I've also gone in the field. I'm there. So until Ugandans buy into Uganda, the foreigners will only get risk takers, but the real investors will only come to a country where citizens have bought into.
Yeah. Well, there's the popular thought that tourism is a largely untapped resource generator for Uganda. And in order for it to grow and for it to become an attractive investment prospect, infrastructure is required. Is this a thought that you agree with, that it is that infrastructure has to be at a national level?
It's true. Infrastructure will attract people to go to places where investment would otherwise not have been. And one of the key infrastructures we always talk about, I think, like roads. Government of Uganda has done quite very well. They've done quite a really good network of roads. Now we have some really good roads. We still are asking for more roads, especially what we call the tourism roads, especially those that lead to the actual product, because we have a very beautiful country. But unfortunately, sometimes the access to those beautiful places is very difficult. We've seen the rains have been washing away bridges, and these bridges are leading you to some of the areas where you find some of our pristine product like the gorillas. And so we need suddenly infrastructure to be upped a bit more. We need domestic carriers to be, we need to invest in the domestic carrier. We need that domestic carrier particularly to actually connect Uganda first, I think. Yeah. When Uganda Airlines comes on, I would advise, let's connect Uganda, and then connect the region, and then connect internationally. Because there is a lot of excitement about the carrier coming, and we're all happy, we're all looking forward.
Can I support your efforts? When I went to Ethiopia, government invited me in February.
Very well connected country.
I flew across Ethiopia. They have 20 airports that actually look better than Entebbe across the country.
20 airports?
Yes, I flew, it's all airports. Now, what shocked me is some of the destinations domestically. The smallest planes that are operating there are Bombardiers. 75 seater, those are smallest. Some destinations, like for me, moving from Gulu to Arua, you have 8 departures in a day. And full planes.
Ethiopia is very well connected. I got a chance to go to Ethiopia about 2 years ago, and I can relate to what Amos is saying. We need to do that for Uganda. And I think in the 60s and 70s, we had that. So can we take it there and then grow this nation? But we also need to have hotels invested in different parts of the country. Decent hotels, clean hotels that people, Ugandans, can actually go and consume. Not only the foreigners, but Ugandans as well need to visit their own country. Like Emma said, most of the times we visit outside countries because it's interesting to take the plane and go. If we can create a plane that will take you from Entebbe to Arua, you've taken a flight and you go and experience your own country. Uganda is the #1 foreign market for tourism into Kenya in Africa. Ugandans visit Kenya so much, but they hardly visit Uganda.
In fact, Diani Beach can close if Ugandans didn't visit.
Yes, a lot of weddings are happening.
Yeah,
Simon.
I think my contribution to this discussion is that whereas we like the infrastructure, as we have to again to be careful where we're opening up roads so that we do not again waste away the pristine areas that people would be motivated to go and visit. The idea of revitalizing the airline to me makes more sense because people, whenever they're planning to come to Africa for recreational purposes, the first thing they ask about is the means of transport to these places. Nobody wants to spend 11 hours
That's true.
really on the road and heavily stressed, and then they begin to reconsider, do I need to stay here, extend my stay or not? What is my next destination? They start to think about the quick destination. So the airline aspect is a very big thing that we need to have more airfields. If we can't move to that pace of having international level quality airports, let's start with the active airfields.
So you have tourists who want to come to East Africa for a weekend, so they want to come to Uganda for a weekend, but they want to go, where's the farthest place?
Kidepo.
That's going to take them how many hours to get there?
11 hours.
11
to 12 hours.
And then another 11 to 12 hours to come back. So
Yeah.
really they have a couple of hours in Kidepo.
Exactly.
I think to make his point strong, they have done research on the top 3 factors that determine anybody moving from their country to another. Number 1 is actually the weather. Uganda has the best weather. Yep. That's number 1 if you go and Google Visa International, that's what it says. So Uganda could be a multi-billion company if it was, if we used weather. Number 2 is the culture. People are looking for different cultures. The food, the people. Number 3, it's the price of the cost.
Price.
But there are 2 factors that still will play, that work independently. The number 1 factor is acquisition of a visa. If it's going to be hard for me to get a visa to your country, now government has played a role there. It's now easy for you to go online, get your visa online, which is a fantastic thing. Number 2, if I am going to take 3 hours or 5 or 6, 8 hours connecting to your country, so I'm flying from London, go to Dubai, finish 8 hours before I come to your country, you'll be the last for me. There must be something so special that's bringing me to your country for you to come. That's why you see tourism, especially airlines. Countries with direct access, like now Kenya is going to be flying to New York. They're creating a direct road in the air from New York into Nairobi. Those ones are going to blossom if they're not blossoming already.
Yes, the other issue that I wanted to talk about, it actually starts with us, Ugandans. We run the zoos in New York as WCS, Wildlife Conservation Society, and we get 2 million visitors every year. And these are Americans mainly visiting these places. That's a small thing. I'm talking about the Bronx Zoo, and I'm talking about the Central Park Zoo, those who watch the marathon in New York. They're running around one of the parks that we manage, the Central Parks, Prospectus Zoo Park and the Queen's Park. It starts with us. But then I've tried to go out with my family several times, and I'm on a lower budget, right? I always look around, I say, okay, where can I find the best accommodation, best in terms of relative to my income, right, and affordability. And you don't see these places. You go to Kidepo, you have a poker lodge, and then the others are of a lower quality. Somebody thinks twice. Sometimes we carry tents because we're avoiding, the quality of those type of services. So we need to invest in the hotel and lodges that are affordable to Ugandans, but also change the mindset that this is not about foreigners coming to see our wildlife. And by the way, the zoos I'm talking about, most of the species people go to see were imported from Africa. We collected them all over the world and just put them in one place. So, and here we're talking about pristine areas. But the other thing is that we can no longer rely on existing natural, physical, characteristics in our parks. We need to go beyond that and broaden the tourism sector. And the reason why communities maybe are reacting the way they are reacting, going back to the conversation we had, is that they don't see really much benefits. Nobody is doing enough to really show them that out of the protection of this wildlife, there is some business coming to us. And it is the private sector and the government to create that environment. You create jobs, you create opportunities for building this infrastructure that we need. That's part of the puzzle. I think we're concentrating too much on the politics and forgetting the core business that we are gifted by nature. I've traveled, and I can tell you I always want to come home. I was offered a job in the US. I said, no, I need to go back home because home is always the best.
Well, you've mentioned and you spoke about investment. So I want to ask, what investment opportunities are there for people like me, for people like these ones? In our national parks, for example, what can we go and invest in?
I think, because nobody has fully analyzed the marketing chain, the value chain of the tourism sector, we're already thinking that it takes so many, resources to do something. And I think that's where we need to do a bit more, including ourselves as Wildlife Conservation Society, to show you that you can actually pick back on Amos, who already has an existing business in Queen Elizabeth National Park, and you also create a small business that would service the low-income end, tourist as such. But there is also, once you have airline, connections, nodes around the country, then you're also taking down the tour and travel companies there. You don't need to hire a car all the way from Kampala just to go to Kasese. I can find, the other day I had 30 visitors from Paris, from wherever, and we had to hire vehicles from Kampala. And I looked at Kasese, I said, no, we will be going for a game drive. Can I find a 4-wheel so that people are comfortable? I can't find the cars to take people around. That's how you create businesses, looking at the entire value chain, the hotels themselves, the backpackers, people carrying stuff, people selling souvenirs, even cultural, tourism. We have a diversity of culture in this country, and it's untapped. So there are many things that we need to do, and we need to just rethink how do we create that elaborative value chain for the tourism sector.
Right. Papa, you look like you wanted to say something.
Yeah, I want to add on to his point as well as Amos's. It's true. I think there are a lot of opportunities that exist. Most times when people look at tourism, they think it's only national parks. There is much more to our tourism than just national parks. Amos mentioned about our good weather. And there's something that you can fit into the value chain to do business as a business opportunity in connection to our good weather. He's talked about how he was looking for a car in Kasese and he couldn't find. Someone is going to come all the way from Kasese to come to Kampala because they want to do tourism, but they want to base in Kampala, when actually we consume the product in Kasese. So we need to figure out how to fit into the value chain. But that said, certainly we still have accommodation needs. Amos has mentioned how few beds we have in this country. We still have accommodation needs and good quality accommodation, because most of the times what we get is sometimes also not to the standard that somebody would wish and be comfortable to stay in. But something that I wanted to mention before we moved on to this was on the infrastructure aspect. You know, we used to have a railway service in this country. And most times we get clients asking, do you have a train that can take me from point A to point B? There are tourists that just like to travel by train. So that's one of the areas that we need to add on to the infrastructure point that we were mentioning earlier on. So train service and train tourism, people basically just boarding from one train to the another, hopping and hop off, is another thing that we need to look at. We also need to look at scenarios like, night coaches where you can actually sleep. Look at the Blue Train in South Africa. Look at marine tourism. Exactly. And then look at Lake Victoria alone. The huge potential that we have for Lake Victoria. Just doing a Lake Victoria circuit. Look at our islands, the Kalangala. Very beautiful islands. So, you know, you don't have to...
exemption on boats.
Exactly.
These lakes are exploited.
Exactly. The lakes are so unexploited. People look at this huge map when you show them this huge lake and is there something I can do there? And you're like, no, not really. Can I not take a boat? No. we have so much potential that we can take advantage of with the freshwater bodies. In the earlier conversation, Amos mentioned about the number of freshwater bodies that we have in this country. The Nile alone.
Yes.
Most of us are not taking advantage of this huge, the longest river in the world. So you don't have to look at just the national parks. There is so many ways you can fit into the value chain of tourism. That's why we're saying tourism is everybody's business.
Okay.
You can actually fit in.
But when Barbara keeps saying the earlier conversation, and I think Amos, you also mentioned it, and they're talking about our earlier conversation that we had a while back on nature and conservation. If you didn't get to watch it, you can check it out on our YouTube, the NTV Uganda YouTube page, and a Perspective with Josephine Karungi, and you'll be able to find it. But let's take a short break. Welcome back. We're coming to you from the Kampala Serena Conference Center Nile Room, and we are talking about investment in our tourism sector. And Amos, you wanted to define what a tourist is. I heard you.
Oh, yes. You know, there's always a dispute about how is tourism bringing in $1.4 billion to the economy. And yet, in our national parks, we have very few people going to our national parks. And this is how it works. According to NWTO, a tourist is a person who leaves place A, goes to place B, spends over 24 hours, less than a year, must not have a permanent job there or permanent residence. So when you are Ugandan and you're going to Gulu, and you plan, you start saying, okay, you call a relative and say, you know what, I am coming to Gulu. That spend on that phone call is actually a tourism earning. When you get into a car, go to a petrol station to get fuel to take you to Gulu, that income is actually attributed to tourism. When you reach Kafu, just to market Kafu, there's no better cassava in the world than Kafu cassava. You eat that cassava, you're going to spend 2,000 shillings buying a piece of cassava. But you don't know the impact. The local guy in Kafu cannot afford to pay 2,000 shillings for the cassava. But you buying the cassava has a direct value to that guy in that community. And that's how you empower the community. You reach Gulu, you go to a restaurant, all that is tourism spent money. So tourism is not just about going to the national parks. I have personally invested in national parks. And I think I was like the first Ugandan to invest inside a national park in 2006, which is unfortunate. I'm 45 today. Oh, yeah. Now, that is unfortunate. Where are the older people? Why did they pick interest in investing in these national parks? Now, what am I trying to say? Since tourism is not just about wildlife and forests and so on and so forth, tourism is about everything. For example, stopovers. Think about the number of cars that are driving from Kampala to the border. You sit there and you think, where would they need their breakfast? Go and put up a stopover. Where would they need their lunch? Go to that distance, put a stopover. Because every time you see cars traveling, money is traveling. That's how you think in terms of business. Now, we're talking about Uganda. Uganda, maybe to just help you understand, that Uganda is probably one of the top 15 countries in terms of biodiversity. He will tell you, in terms of, it is that relative abundance of flora, fauna, and the general ecosystem. We have 53.9% of the population of the mountain gorillas, 11% of the wild species of birds. But when you talk about diversity, the Nile alone, recently I was having a chat with one of the key, Andrew Mwenda, about the Nile. Egypt, before it went into problems, was making over $10 billion from tourism. But today, the Nile in Egypt attracts $3.5 billion. But the value of the Nile in Egypt is not close to the value of the Nile in Uganda. Why? The source. When people were looking at the Nile, everybody was fighting. People spent 100 years looking for the source of the Nile.
But what does our source of the Nile look like right now?
Terrible. Then, on the same Nile, you have one of the best rafting opportunities on earth.
Yeah.
On the same Nile, you have the most powerful waterfalls on earth. You see what makes countries is looking at a subject like the Indians will tell you about Taj Mahal, created, but we're talking about the Nile. In fact, when we go to market Uganda and you tell people the Nile begins in Uganda, people think you're so patriotic that you can lie for your country. It is true that the Nile begins in Uganda. So if Egypt is making 3.5 billion, we should be making 10 billion out of our Nile.
Yes, but, that takes a deliberate decision by the government to invest in this infrastructure. We know that for some of the sites, there is a heavy upfront investment cost. And that's where I'm advocating for public-private partnership. That's how you reduce that cost for any potential investor. You have a mixed model where you have grants coming in, you have private funds coming in, and that's how you develop these areas. you were talking about you're defining a tourist. I had 2 guests from the US, and when we were going to the American embassy and they saw the furniture in one place, they were really amazed. They have never seen furniture in one place just like what you've seen in Zambia. And to them, that was a tourist.
Oh, yes.
And the park, the
Yes,
taxi park.
our taxi
They're
park.
asking, how do these taxis exit the park? How do they? All right, how?
It looks normal to us, isn't it?
Even I have asked myself that question a couple
How
of
do they
times.
exit? It's a very exciting thing, but it takes a lot of investment. The other thing, again, the Uganda Wildlife Authority needs to rethink how we attract tourists to these parks. Because
Yeah.
these are massive areas. We need to think about the ecosystem services themselves.
Okay.
Most of the businesses rely on these pristine areas for their business to prosper. We are constructing the hydropower dam in Karuma, but without protecting the catchment around there, those turbines will not run. So why can't the companies, in a way, contribute to the protection of some of these areas? And that becomes an income stream for Uganda Wildlife Authority,
It's
rather
true.
than looking at tourists.
The oil companies.
Get entries. Oil companies are
Yeah.
coming on board. So these are some of the areas you're asking us to flag. Where are the investment opportunities? Those are all opportunities that could open up to many Ugandans and also the government of Uganda.
Okay. Well, as my audience thinks of whether they have a question or not, here is a comment. What have we done in the following areas? Marketing. Good PR showing Uganda as a desirable holiday destination. There are people who still think all the gorillas are in Rwanda.
Yes, it's true.
They don't know Uganda has any. So we are competing with other destinations that are better organized, much better organized. But it is not a zero-sum game. We might be able to offer something that they do not have: auxiliary services, hotels, other sightseeing destinations, financial institutions for tourists to easily and safely and cheaply access their funds. Communication, high-speed internet. The tourists come and they want to be able to get in touch with their families very quickly. Are these things that are feasible?
I think there's already there's been a huge investment in the telecommunication companies, and I think the government just needs to do more to create the right incentives for them to move out to the countryside. I think we're already moving in the right direction. Of course, for any development in pristine areas, you have also to think about what are the potential negative impacts, and I think that needs also a thought through. The other thing that is really important, I was making a proposal to Uganda Wildlife Authority that they need also to, consult out or seek a private company to collect these revenues, so that this company collects on behalf of Uganda Wildlife Authority, because that improves efficiency. They will help us do the marketing. If you go for a commissioning system, you just have to have solid agreements, and they remit the funds annually, but they help you do
With a reward system.
Yes, a reward system. They do the marketing for you. Right
Okay.
now, we are not marketing our country. Every time you talk about your country, you're just all alone. And I think
Your
our
claims are not
embassies-
supported.
The embassies, by the way, I should tell you this. Our embassies don't care. I was in the US for 6 years, and nobody bothers to know whether there is a Ugandan here, apart from the Northern whatever forum that,
Which is for a drinking party.
which is
Our ministers, our leaders go there to also enjoy.
doing. I mean, they should also help in the marketing, and that takes investment to have these social events. You see, those who live here, most of the foreign embassies hold these events. They organize cultural festivities, but what they are doing, they are marketing their home countries. That, look, here are opportunities, and here are the business opportunities for our country.
We had a conversation
I
with
need-
Amos actually on the conventions and the other, what happens in the US and also in Europe, and we'll be airing that episode as well. And Amos had very strong remarks about
I think the truth is that as a country we have failed to tap into our own opportunities. One of the problems we have as a country is we do not understand the value of marketing ourselves. A Ugandan is extremely very happy when, say, one of the telecom companies, MTN, MTN spends about $4 million to market its image. Here, we already know it exists. How much more do you need to market a country? South Africa spends $70 million. Who doesn't know South Africa? Every single year across the world. In Africa alone, they have a budget to market South Africa among South Africans. $10 million. They get our journalists, they take them to talk about South Africa. Kenya has got 18 PR firms across the world to simply talk about the positive things of Kenya. When a Kenyan qualifies for a marathon, Man, they take that clip, make it an international thing. For us, the MC of the just concluded marathon was saying Uganda is the most beautiful country I've been to. Uganda Tourism Board should have gone and picked that stuff, marketed it. It brought the journalists to say, even this man has endorsed Uganda.
Even being there in Australia.
Yes, even being there in Australia.
As a marketing board.
Absolutely. So what we need, number one, is key. You know, opportunities, investment follows opportunities. If we marketed this country, making over $10 billion a year is completely nothing. Number two, we need to train our Ugandans. Ugandans were the best people in hospitality in East and Central Africa until 1971 because of the Uganda hotels, which was Serena one of them. In 1971, when Idi Amin took over power, the majority of the Ugandan trained personnel went to start Kenya's tourism. In 1975, the Kenyans saw that the Ugandans were doing a brilliant job. You know what happened? They set up a Utalii training school. When they set up the Utalii training school, they gave it to a Swiss. They told them, in 10 years, you must make sure that Kenyans come to take over. You train trainers, because Uganda does not lack buildings. It lacks people who can impart the right knowledge for the competition in terms of hospitality. Then after that, 1975, the government of Kenya had to pay the first 300 people to join Utalii. Big money for them to, because no one wanted to join tourism. In 1995, 10 years later, 5,000 people competed because they saw the value of hospitality to 300 spots. In 1995, 20 years later, 75,000 Kenyans competed for 300 slots. This is how important it is. Now, Kenya is training, Utalii is training 100%, but retaining 30%, 70% an export of labor. Even Uganda here. This hotel alone has so many Ugandans working here. They have worked out deals with the Hilton Group of hotels. They sent over 400 kids to around the world to Utalii. They have signed a deal with Dubai. Maybe we'll talk about training later. Dubai takes hundreds of Kenyan kids. Most of the big hotels you go to are Kenyans. Ugandans can. If you board Emirates from Entebbe to any destination, you'll have 2 Kenyans. I was in New York in January. I am entering business class. It's all controlled by Kenyans. The guy looks at my passport and says, oh, Wekesa. Wekesa is more popular a name in Kenya than it is here. I was served like but I thought, why can't it be a Ugandan, you know?
Well, let's take another short break and we'll be right back. Welcome back. We're coming to you from the Kampala Serena Conference Center. Let's take one quick question from our audience. Yes?
Mine is a submission on Amos Wekesa's presentation about Ugandans buying into Uganda. The reason is they're not buying into Uganda because the service providers or the investors who are in Uganda do not consider Ugandans as potential travelers. They have that negative perception about local clients as opposed to the whites. So I would rather move outside the country where I'll be taken special rather than coming to someone's organization or hotel where I'll be regarded no use to him or her. Thank you.
I hear you.
I could say yes in one way. He's right that a number of Ugandans try to focus on where they can get higher returns, and they don't understand that Ugandans actually can spend. But that said, we also need to go back and appreciate the fact that Ugandans, we study about prairies, the rainlands. In our minds, it's very difficult to convince a Ugandan that Uganda is good. And that's why we shout so negative about our own country as a people. The other thing is the inability for Ugandans to go out and look for information. For example, entering a national park, a foreigner pays $40 for 24 hours, a Ugandan pays 15,000 shillings, honestly. Where on Earth, you want to enter a national park for free? No, these national parks must be conserved and must be protected, and therefore we should be willing to pay. Ugandans, sometimes, many Ugandans also want to everything for free, especially if he's a Ugandan.
I mean, they feel like, I'm home, why should I have to pay a certain amount? But I went around asking a couple of people who have tried to invest in the tourism industry, and some of the problems they told me they had was, for example, when you were speaking about entrance fees to these parks. So one person told me a visit to Bwindi on gorilla tracking requires complicated, expensive permits on all individuals. So for them, that's one of the hindrances.
Is that for foreign
no,
tourists?
I think to a Ugandan who are trying to get foreigners in.
If you're talking about maybe bulk sort of purchase of entry permits, maybe that's the whole thing. But I think the Uganda Wildlife Authority has been trying to move to the electronic process where you can book online and you have your travel card with all your credit or whatever, you just swipe anywhere you go. I don't know how efficient that is, But if you're talking about Ugandans, it's 150,000 to track gorillas. And yeah, it's been
affordable.
Yeah, it's still affordable.
Yeah. But I think what we need to appreciate is that yes, Uganda, I don't know whether by mistake or by design, hired 3 PR firms, one in the US, one in the UK, and one in Germany. These were brilliant PR firms. They did a brilliant job. The challenge, however, was that on the ground there was no group to manage these PR farms to be able to talk about what markets makes Uganda bigger than primates.
Yeah.
Now we have 13 groups of gorillas in our national parks, and those 13 groups you're only allowed 8 people per day. Scientific reason, as a scientist can tell you. So in a year we have about 37,000 gorilla permits. So right now, because of these 3 PR farms, they marketed Chibale National Park, Bwindi and Queen Elizabeth National Park. I can tell you, because of this intensive marketing in the UK, US, and Germany, right now it's even difficult to get gorilla permits for 2019, which is a good thing, but that's very small numbers. So what we Ugandans must know is that we should be able to market this country as a country that you can come to without seeing the primates, but still enjoy. You know, go to Mount Elgon, go to Mount Rwenzori, go to the Nile, come and enjoy the Kampala culture, go and see the tax park. That's what we need to be marketing our country as.
Yes. Papa, you've been very quiet. I want to ask you about government support. For example, tax breaks.
I think there is very little government support for the Ugandan investor. Most times you get a lot of Ugandan investors have invested in the national parks. They've invested locally, but they don't get the tax holidays that a foreign investor would get.
No way.
I know UIA will argue that you've got to come and register your investment, but I think most people have found it difficult to go through the whole process for whatever reasons, I don't know. But we also have a very unfavorable tax regime, and it makes it difficult for people to usually get back the returns that they're looking for. When you invest in the national parks, there's high cost of operation.
Yes.
You've got to make sure that you're delivering at the same level as someone who is in Kampala. I have invested in a national park. I have got to carry food from Kampala on the bus. Then my people have to come from the mountain, come down to collect this food. They've got to make sure that they serve the food properly. I've got to make sure I have internet. I've got to make sure that I run a generator because I'm not on the national grid. I'm not on the national grid for water. I've got to make sure that there is clean, treated water. I've got to make sure that it is warm, it's hot when the client comes back from. So Amos, myself, we've invested in the national parks. The challenges we face, and yet when it comes to the tax regime, it is very unfavorable to a local investor, a Ugandan investor. Sometimes tourism has not been understood. We have always argued that we are an indirect export because we are the #1 forex exchange earner. The difference between our product in terms of export and coffee or tea, our product, you consume it over and over and over and over again. It does not leave Uganda. While the coffee, the tea and the other things, they will go. Once you've taken that coffee out, you've got to produce more coffee to take out. While the tourism product, what you're producing is really the itineraries.
But when you bring the 1,000 tourists or 1 million tourists, you increase the consumption of coffee.
Exactly.
You increase, and that's the good market. It's a market that is willing to pay higher.
Yes.
I just want to put on I'm investing right now, and I wrote on my social media page. I had an electricity line that I pulled 10 years ago. I spent 250 million shillings pulling an electricity line so many kilometers to Simba, where I'm building right now in Queen Elizabeth. Unfortunately, the line was in front of the scenery that I wanted to use to build the new lodge we're doing. I walked from office to office. It cost me 56 million shillings to be able to just shift a line. That was not planned in my investment. 2, I have had no water. I've been shifting water from Kasese. I spent $100 per truck to bring water, so I can use 10 trucks a week. Now, I can imagine multiply that by $100. Now, I go to my site to try and look for water I can't get. I have had to go to 2 kilometers, buy land in the village, sink a borehole 95 kilometers deep, and it has cost me over 120 million shillings to be able to bring water to my site. But the moment right now, the community leader which gets a bit of money is coming and saying, you need to employ our people, they're giving me completely nothing. And by the time we finish this, big tax man is going to be on your door. But no one wants to listen.
You don't get a tax holiday from the time you've invested.
Nothing.
Other people get 5 years. We don't get that. Immediately you've invested, someone is on your case, they are asking you for income tax. You've been investing, there's no income that you've made, but someone is asking you for income tax. It's It's not fair.
Okay,
It's
so
not
our
favorable.
time is fast spent.
Yeah.
So I'll ask you, Simon, to make your closing remarks. Then we'll just hear from both of you, and then we'll close.
Okay, I think this is why I'm proposing the idea of the public-private partnership model, because then those costs that Amos is talking about and Barbara would be absorbed by the government because it has interest in this business. But the other thing is that you have to have a long planning horizon. For as long as we plan for 5 years, because we're pegging it to the political cycle, we're not going to get it right, because you're dealing with something that takes a long time to repay back. And that's why government comes in hand as a guarantor to this level of investment. The other thing is that it is a collective responsibility for every Ugandan to market our country, talk positively about our country. And even, I will now begin to believe that we should have censorship in our media, because we tend to capitalize on very, picky issues, trivial issues, that do not make good for our country. And every time a potential tourist thinks about these, screens, whatever, invents, he says, that's a very risky country to visit. I'd rather go to Tanzania, or I'd rather go to South Africa. When Kenya was hit in 2002 and the Mombasa terrorist incidents, they lost over, 12 million US dollars in just that time alone in the tourism industry. So we need to tackle those issues, but we need to do research. Government relies on NGOs to do research, and yet research is very important for the country. So you get to know the marketing aspect, the government websites. You go to the website, you can find the information you need. And this is a public resource. Why can't we have the information? And you're trying out a page, it circles and circles, and the delay time just puts you off. All right?
Barbara, would you like to make your closing remarks?
Yes, I think as Ugandans, as part of our Patriotic Act, we need to speak positively about our country. Amos mentioned how Ugandans are the best marketers for their country. We need to market our country. Most times we are very good at painting the wrong picture, the negative picture. We are so good at social media at painting the negative things that have happened, as opposed to talking about the positive things about Uganda. We as Ugandans need to market our own country before we even talk about government. I've seen Amos, every time Amos travels, he's wearing the Uganda shirt.
Even my winter jackets are Ugandan.
We need to get to that level of patriotism when we are marketing the country and we are proud to be Ugandans. You meet a Nigerian will be proud to be Nigerian. Even when they say bad things about Nigeria, they will defend it even when they know it's bad. But when they meet a fellow Nigerian and they're having that, then they will get down low to fight whatever they have to fight. But in the eyes of the public, Nigeria is the best country, the greatest country in the world. Why can't we as Ugandans equally emulate that and promote our own country?
All right, thank you, Barbara. Amos, finally?
Yeah, I think Uganda is our home. We can complain, like she said. She's brought a very good important point. We should not stop fighting each other internally. It's like in a we're in a relationship here. We should not fight ourselves internally. But when it comes to presentation of a nation, let's be very clear that Uganda is much bigger than all of us. But also too, we need to define an investor as a human being. An investor should not be a white man. No one, Uganda thinks I'm an investor. I am actually putting in more money than many of these people you see on the street. So I need to also be considered. In fact, you will not go to India, for example, and they give you a first priority over an Indian when you're investing. So a Ugandan must be given an opportunity, and it must be given an opportunity over a non-Ugandan. It's just normal.
Right. Thank you all very much. Our time has run out very quickly, but it's been a pleasure having you for these two discussions. Thank you very, very much. Well, that brings us to the end of tonight's conversation. Remember, you can follow us on Facebook and on Twitter. The hashtag is hashtag PWJK. That's it for tonight. Coming up is NTV Weekend Edition.